So let's review for a second. Tell me if this looks like a good list to you. If someone was what we're calling a grown-up, very mature, healthy, happy human being, or if they're a Buddha, if they're an enlightened human being, this person more than likely would have a fairly regulated body, have the capacity not to be extreme in their reactivity to the world. They would probably have attuned communication, some skill in connecting and attuning with others, emotional balance, as opposed to being all over the map or disruptive to others, have the capacity to respond with some flexibility, not getting caught in your own, what do we call it, stuff. To modulate fear, which is one of the core ways in which we get dysregulated, right? We get frightened. Also, that this is happening with some moral awareness. You know, someone can be very attuned and attentive, and if they don't have moral awareness, what you have is a lethal human being. So it's very crucial, which means the person was probably also intuitive. They have a sense of that their body can give them information, not just their mental capacity. Their body gives them, the gut feeling about themselves. They have some insight, empathy with others. These are all functions that in the research on mindfulness unfold regularly through mindful practice. If you would like to have these in your life, if you'd like to have better body regulation, attuned communication, emotional balance all around, then mindful practices are what you can engage in to encourage those qualities to unfold. Interestingly enough, they're exactly the same qualities. They are the functions of the prefrontal cortex. So these two things begin to inform each other. Meditation practice encourages the integrative function of the prefrontal cortex, which is the one that supports growing up and waking up. The prefrontal cortex functions in these ways when it's functioning well and unhindered by pain, difficulty, distress, especially things like trauma or difficulty. So we're homing in on something that is crucial and essential, and that has to do with both our capacity to grow into our fullness as a human being and also wake up as whole human beings. What happens when you just look at it, at the photo? What does it call up inside of you? You know, your prefrontal cortex can be stimulated just by a photograph, because this is what we do. Human beings orient naturally to try to pick up these signals. We want to be relaxed, regulated, balanced, expressive, and receptive. We want to be able to walk together on the path. We want to be able to be connected. And all of that is just the complexity and fullness of human life. And what spiritual practices do is it allows us to become a larger and larger container for life energy. Life energy wants a channel to flow through. And if you'd like to become an open channel for that flow, then these are the practices that help us really come home to who we really are in this double helix of growing up and waking up. When we meet difficulty, remember what Sujati did with the Buddha? Offered him nourishment when he was in a difficult place. And the whole Dharma wheel began to turn by simple kindness. Later on, he was asked by one of his monks, the Buddha said, what should we do if we experience a difficult emotion? He says, gaze upon it with kindness and remain still. Engage in turning toward and meeting fully without messing with it too much. We're a great culture for messing with things. It sells a lot of self-help books, but it can be problematic. Someone who has that capacity, there's a name for it in Buddhism. It's called a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is an archetypal image of a being who's dedicated to the well-being of all other beings. It's someone who says, I'm going to dedicate my life to helping other folks be free. In fact, the extreme definition that sometimes you see is that in the old way, if you're living a life until you're awakened and you can get off the cycle of birth and death, a bodhisattva says, you know what, I'm going to hang around until every last person has been freed from the cycle of birth and death, then I'll go. So it's just a sort of an extreme archetypal image of generosity, altruism, and care for others. There was a Zen teacher, Uchiyama Roshi, who died about 15 years ago. And he lived in Japan all of his life, but he taught a lot of Western students. So he learned to speak English a bit. And he was a wonderful guy. And so one day, one of his students asked him, what is a bodhisattva? It's one of those things that students do when they know perfectly well what the answer is, but they want to see what the teacher's going to say. You know, it's why you line up at the microphones, right? You kind of know what we're going to say, but you want to ask and to see what comes out. So one of the students asked Uchiyama one time, what is a bodhisattva? And he thought for a minute and he said, I think a grown-up. A grown-up. A mature human being. This is not some esoteric thing that you find only in some hidden valley in Tibet. It's not a way of being that you can only develop in a temple in Kyoto or in a Trappist monastery in the south of France. This is the path of an ordinary, shaky human being like you and I, that we all have this capacity to grow up fully if we help each other. And if we don't stop that arc of growing up fully, we begin to wake up to who and what we really are, and that makes us want to help other people.